Artificial lighting. Make artificial people. Artificial food. It's very if I like the artificial light. Could artificial happiness be effective? Or could artificial suffering? There's a lot of suffering. It's kind of what I want to talk about. There's a lot of other things that could be talked about, but there's a lot of people suffering, and it's everywhere for the most part. Maybe not in all places at once, but there's a balance. The system wouldn't work if it was at all places at once, obviously. But it's everywhere from mental illness to homelessness to financial problems to biological problems and genetic disorders, ground and the soil. Artificial life. I don't know if that's a problem, but what people are maybe doing in relation to that at least could be problematic for some. You know, in the same concept that there are cities and towns throughout the landmass we're on in the world, the bubble, and if it was just all out homelessness, obviously the cities wouldn't work. And also wouldn't be homelessness, it would just be the way things are. Then imagine it was all homelessness except for a few of the wealthy individuals, but I don't want to get to that. But you know, it's spread out to the point where there's a gradient of suffering, so that the most that you see, or the majority of what you see and what people are exposed to or experience themselves, is somewhere in the bearable level of what people can appreciate, basically, and therefore stand to defend and work for, live for, and ultimately die for. And that gradient, largely it's an illusion, but it's still something there, and that's what makes the system work. You know, so I wonder if it's the same throughout time, to the degree where we can never actually reach a place or in time, an age, where it was entirely suffering, and that is, you know, what we knew or all that we knew. That there would have to be something that happens that naturally rebalances things. Another thing I want to talk about quickly, I guess, in this one is, along with a lot of suffering, there's a lot of different reasons for that. There are a lot of people who are extremely sensitive, basically emotionally sensitive individuals. And the idea is that people have to know how to handle the emotions that they feel. They have to know how to handle the energies, otherwise they become overwhelming. And really, I mean, it's just semantics, or maybe a different way of putting things, like opinionation. But then, when we're being overwhelmed, it's almost as if the things that are supposed to be adding grace and character to life are then destroying our enjoyment, or at least our balanced experience in life. But maybe it still balances out and it's all a necessity. Because the point is, everything happens for a reason. The suffering that's here, the suffering one feels individually, the pain one goes through. The other aspect of that is that you also have to make it for a reason. You have to take part in working with the suffering, the pain, to help make something come of it. It's always about opportunities, because that's all we have in this big chessboard type thing. My tendon's tight, so I'm like leaning over. And the main thing is that there's a balance between having a degree of sensitivity that enables you to experience things that other people can't, or choose not to, or would be afraid of or overwhelmed by, and being able to, being able to control that to the degree where there's a productive output in life. And the ability to do that is the gauge of everything. It's the controller, the limiter of what's going to happen. So you don't want to go too far, but it's basically a balance in this way that I want to present it, between knowing your own sensitivity and feeling the emotions that basically break down the barriers we put up, that we kind of walk around on like on stilts, ignoring the floodwaters, if you will, or just the natural habitat, or at least the way it's been for a while, of the environment. And when something happens in life and knocks a person off those stilts, or they get a little bit too rotted, they're drawn closer to the ground, and there's that rush of emotion that often we perceive in a way as overwhelming. And it's because there's a disruption of daily life, of daily responsibilities and things like that. However, in that disruption, in that basically destruction, that settling of the haze of what was, of the concepts we use to label reality in a certain way, in that clearing, we see what's actually there and how we actually feel. And there's really no greater value with how valuable is the self to one who has known nothing else, and can really know nothing else, at least to the point that we know it. You're always the self wherever you are. How valuable is that you can retrieve what basically become like lost emotions, lost emotional layers to the meaning of who we are, the reasons behind why we feel, behind our particular situation, what we notice and who we see, and our impact on others, and it's our relationship with ourselves, others, and in life. It comes down to emotion. If you become emotionally cold and kind of just go through the routine, that has an impact on others, because it's almost as if they see and say and think to themselves, like, oh, another one kind of is transformed. Because often people are emotionally open, whether they're, we're getting into concept of souls or true awareness or whatever we're talking about. Baby's born usually emotionally open, and depending on how things happen, you can get a person who's at a level of adaptation or a kind of imbalanced adult. But that emotional openness, that power to feel, so you gotta ask yourself, where else are you gonna get that? We don't really have knowledge of that, at least not on the mundane level. So it's the most valuable thing ever. Imagine being a rock for eons, and then one day you can feel. And it's also bad. There's two different groups. I've gone through this before. Two different ideologies that the feeling of being human is a trick, and the body's a trick, and it's a duality game that every good thing you feel also comes with the pain and the suffering. It's like a double-sided coin. And if you were to expand in your life the amount of good feeling you have throughout the whole, simultaneously you're expanding the amount of suffering that you're also capable of having, and that's just logic. And maybe it doesn't have to be that direct in being that it's either that way or that it's all lovey-dovey and something purely brilliant, in that we get caught up in emotions in a way, chasing them, chasing the feeling, as if that's purely what makes us who we are. Which is, we're also more than that. We're the observer of those things. We can choose to ignore those things if we want. But the point is, there's a balance. For overly emotional, it's unstable. It's maybe too stable in the sense of emotions and kind of dry. It doesn't feel fulfilling. It doesn't feel like there's a presence of self. It feels robotic. It feels like the mechanism of the body is all that is, and then, that's a wonder in itself, but there's obviously something more than that occurrence, just chemicals and cells, that gives us the feeling of who we are, which is also to say it's probably more than the emotions that are generated there as well. But the idea is, if we retain that sense of self and regain or remain what people in traumatic experiences kind of become traumatized or shocked away from, then there's a benefit to that, which is invaluable, but it does have to do with suffering. I'm kind of getting caught up in words here. It just comes back to that suffering, or that balance between the knowledge of our own sensitivity and our own ability to feel the presence of who we are, and resist the automation and resist the stupefaction, basically, of the systems that we have access to, the mind, body, and emotions, and whatever else could be said to describe that, whatever degrees of accuracy. And that if we go away from suffering entirely, we become automated. And eventually, to get back to that, to break the stilts, to get off of them, to feel the water below, we have to go through a period of opening up. And if we haven't processed the emotional information that we've been shutting out for so long through these artificial boundaries, these concepts of who we are, it's as traumatizing as whatever the events were that kind of closed us off in the first place. It's kind of like a cauterization and a decauterization of a wound. It's just the same thing as healing. Healing the body takes time, but imagine doing years worth of healing and possibly undoing scar tissue emotionally in a short amount of time, because you don't have the choice to, because people accidentally set themselves up in these ways, where society is kind of like a trap for that. If it's a stream with a bunch of twists and turns that has the water all, swirling in a certain way. Well, there are a bunch of dead pockets where it kind of just pulls and backs up. And, there's not a lot of an oxygenation and things like that compared to the other areas. And cities, at least, are pretty much based upon that. It's a business based upon decay. But again, there are ideas, outlooks, perspectives, theories, whatever you want to call them, that's basically what this world is. It's a system created out of the destruction of what was and the consummation of what was into a new system, basically a living system, like a living body. I think like the future eats the past. And so, but I don't know, I just kind of want to just say that, I don't know why. I mean, I know why. I know people will get it as well. If we shut out what we feel because we don't want to feel it for so long, because we think it's a degree of suffering or pain, to regain ourselves, we have to regain that pain, that suffering, and go through that. And in that weeping or melancholy or hopefully short and subtle depression, but depression is kind of too far, it's where it's just become dulled out. In that darkness or that pain, emotional pain, anguish, that's the process of resensitization of the body. And after it's like the floodgates open, there's that super sensitivity. There's a period of desensitization and normalization. And a lot of mental illness, what we see in the world, is basically the only problem in the world, which cascades into other scenarios that become problems and issues in the material systems, environments, society, is some disruption. The only problem is some disruption. It's mental disorder, but it's related to some disruption of our ability to limit and control and initiate and postpone, which you really shouldn't or can't do, but it kind of happens sometimes. Our own emotional sensitivity, resensitization, and desensitization processes and periods, to the point where if we could fully manage that without getting entangled with these chemicals and mind entrainment systems, even certain TV shows, or a lot of them. And I'm not saying that a lot of these TV shows that are telling the truth about what we call science fiction and things like that in the future and the past and what's happened in underground bases and other worldly beings, etc., aren't good ways to learn about what's going on, because all you have to do is kind of put two and two together. But like certain reality TVs, something like that, things that remind us how weak we are in this already emotionally ravaged, war-torn environment, and how much better materialistic, emotionally shallow people have it, is like war. It's like ammo for a spiritual war. We don't consider the spirit of a being, the mind and soul, a real thing when it comes down to brass tacks, and so it's a war zone everywhere and nobody seems to mind it. But again, it does happen for a reason. When one gets through the suffering, they're opened back up to a world of who they were as they are now. And again, that presence of self and the ability to feel and even to see that there are so many people suffering is invaluable beyond description, beyond words. What would you do if you were a rock and then eons later you could feel you had a family? The strange thing is, most of the rocks already have a family, and there's this strange, subtle atomic layer consciousness to everything that is basically exactly where it wants to be. But It's not that we don't have that. We've disillusioned ourselves and re-illusioned ourselves inside a mental labyrinth, a facade that we think is helping us, but it's like an alcohol addiction or something. You know, any addiction is making the problem worse. It's putting off what's ultimately going to be a very traumatic, shocking experience when all that emotion comes back, when the stilts rot through, and we're forced to feel the water and the depth of our emotion. And it's often traumatizing. And people go insane. People go insane from projects, occult knowledge, trauma, ritual abuse. People go insane just because of the exposure to the society or city life, or having to find their own way and feeling that they're not getting the help they deserve, or that they're not capable, and no one's told them that all, you know, they can just accept that they're capable and things will change in its own way. So people are lost. They're chained, enslaved, like ball and chain, but it's to their own wayward thinking. But it's still, like I said, that, you know, somebody's soul is enslaved. There's still something happening. It just doesn't mean if somebody's mind is abused, there's still something happening. But we don't really have, and we're in this weird null zone right before the systems kick on or switch over, where to, you know, our systems, our actual systems, where it's like, you know, the blame game, the victimization game of how emotionally sensitive one can be. But, you know, that's not how it should be, or it's not honest, because people are truly emotionally sensitive. You weep for yourself, but you begin weeping because of seeing the suffering of others. And so at that point, you're not going to sit there and the guy weeping in the wilderness comes out and he starts yelling at everybody, telling them to fuck themselves. That's not really what it's, you know, what it's about. Or demands his rights and the system be a certain way for him or for certain other people. And the system's already eating us anyway. It's like demanding a crocodile that's biting your legs to try the other foot first. Doesn't make any difference. And so then, you know, in that emotionality, we have to basically get through it on our own. We have to realize that there's always help. There's always someone. But most everything that is propped up, basically, those systems that are telling us, you know, there's emotions down below, you don't want to feel them here, walk on this wooden deck and then you'll be safe, but you have to pay this fee, or, you know, belong to this cultural group and basically belong to this movement and stand up for these rights and do these changes. That's just a bigger set of rotting stilts that some other people have propped up because it's a business to do that. The only difference there is when those stilts fall, everybody that's been on them is going to fall with them, and they're going to have a whole world of suffering at the same time. So kind of with that, remember your own unity but your own independence, because that's just as important and invaluable as the entire world. Because how much can you compare between them? You've only known what you have access to. These are like philosophical, kind of emotional ideas. And the sun's been coming up. Anyway, yeah, and we'll probably see more things that are going to try and drive people to their limit. And, you know, a lot of what we learned in the projects is that it's all bullshit. You get to your limit, the world pushes you to your limit so that the limit moves a little bit down the line this time. And the next time around you do the same thing. And the limit doesn't mean anything. The limit is what you want it to be. It's however many qubits of self-referential space you have within your bubble of expanding awareness, you know, rated at what ratio or proportion or relative measurement according to others. And we're all just expanding in our bubbles of how much we can take and how much we can influence and kind of beneficially encourage others to expand in their own right, but as well there's tricks everywhere. For instance, you could have somebody who's expanding their bubble, and they have, however many inches across, and they're doing it at 1 inch per 1 inch in relative space. And you have somebody, and they've done that, and then they expanded it to 1 billion inches, and they've got all this information there, all the experiences. And you have somebody who codes their information, their experience or perception differently by realizing that they can change one of the angles, one of the proportions. Now you have 1,000 inches to where you have 1 inch down here, and they have a bubble that's a few feet across compared to the other person's that's literally like 1,000 meters or more, miles across. It's obviously not 1 billion inches, but and the guy or whoever that just has this little hand-sized or foot-sized bubble has more information in that whole thing than that 1 billion-inch across size bubble, because they coded the information differently. So it's not about pure expansion. Expansion in that sense might be dilution and dissolution into lack of what was there. So it's all about how you look at what's going on and what we're really doing here. I'm going to leave it at that. Maybe come up with something a little bit more organized. Been thinking a little bit about responses and maybe how to play on that, but I have to kind of go with what's most beneficial. Look at that, ambulance going to somebody who needs help, who in this moment can't rely on anything other than that option. The beginning of the end in the world is based upon that. It's based upon people working together. Whatever we're going to get to, or whatever was going to happen, is going to be because we did it together, and we either damned ourselves together, or we built something greater and more organized and more intelligent together. And as well, you can do it yourself, but you're just going to most often spend that time waiting for the rest of the world, or finding a way to awaken the others. We'll see. There is a lot said as well in between the lines. What is this world if we're all asleep? So things are happening here, but it'll always be interesting. I excuse the delay in posting. It's really, there's a lot of things that happen. There's a lot of internet drama. Some people that are straight up making deals and then hosting radio shows to try and win over the population. They're all listed, and they better, I hope they find some compassion before the stilts break, because there are crews for preventing drowning of people who turn face down in the emotional waters of this world that are like 3 inches deep and choose to inhale the water, or don't realize they have a choice. But that's not a fun experience, and nobody really wants to go through that, unless they do. Suffering isn't really what it seems. We grow because we're pushing that limit further every time, but it's not really about expanding aimlessly towards, disillusion, but organizing ourselves and making more competent and more focused and more potent the knowledge that we have within the experiences that we have right now. Which is a strange way to put it, because then it's just going to cycle into more experiences, but 30 minutes in. Alright, thank you. I also wanted to say, don't be parasitic, which is, obviously telling people isn't going to change much, or people listening to talk like this might already know. But there are people that become parasitic because of their lack of understanding and their lack of willingness to go through with what they're experiencing. And it's like they're trying to kind of bleed out the energy of others, whether it's sexual or even intellectual and mental, from copying people and things like that, to emotional and getting a rise out of people and being like an instigator of energy that isn't beneficial or productive. The more, a person falls into that, the more caustic and self-destructive the tendencies become, until there's an inevitable collapse of that boundary between who we think we are and want to be seen as and who we really are and deep down know we are. It's the main thing. And that in itself is even deeper, because any guidelines you draw up to ward against being that, well, at some point that's going to be crossed in order to stop somebody from taking advantage of you in an attempt to basically make you like that, or to stop someone who's already like that and is going to have to, require some level of force or some level of sternness, where kindness isn't going to cut it. So, everyone has their own, but it's just so beautiful, the world. I've always been like this. It's part of why, I have my experience, my background. You can see disgust in anything. Dogs, people walking in the morning, brisk air, as the sun comes through the trees, and it'll be warmer later, but it's refreshing to be this cold to shock yourself. And, you could say the stupid people walking their evolutionarily outdated and obsolete dogs, lap dogs that are going to surely die or diverge into a slave race species because they can't survive in their own natural habitat anymore. Wearing clothes made by slave labor from kids across the ocean, and chemicals and so on, and all this. And this is the reason people live and die. This is the reason wars were fought, so we could do that. But in the same sense, it's the most beautiful thing that we know of. Even with the disgusting truth behind a lot, it's still, for the most part of people here, all we know of, the only world that we know. In the same sense, everyone here knows of another world, because that's how it works. But the ability to just observe and to experience it and to wipe the mind and see things as they are, in that disgusting truth of it, there's that beauty that's always been there and can't be erased. And so beautiful. And it's so worth it. I guess I'm just gonna do a few things I have to get done today. And if they are to be, and continue to think like this, but know that that's the backdrop, the beginning and after of everything I've seen, been through, known, and done for the most part, is that it's so beautiful that it can't be tarnished. But we also can never live up to the glory of what could be, what we truly are, and what we don't really know. And there's a lot of disgusting stuff. Think about all the bacteria floating around your cells, your body, the intracellular fluid right now, probably little. Anyway, it's clean systems, but it's just, we're primarily other organisms in the physical sense, so it's shockingly, almost horrifyingly more complex and foreign than we see on the outer layer. The reasons behind the money trade, the power, the cover-ups, the religions and sciences and disillusions and truth and exposure and all that. But even though it's what it is, for what it is, not for what we made of it and what we did with it. For what it is, it's still beautiful. Which, maybe get me some problems with those that believe or know in their sense that fallen leaders created this environment as a kind of virtual prison for our minds, or what are called our souls. Even with that, we can turn it all around and make it what we want. But you have to be strong enough to do that, because it might be a little bit deeper than, you might think. You'll see some things that you never thought you'd really be able to see. But even then, it's still beautiful. Even in the cold, it still feels good. But again, there's a balance. Nobody wants to freeze to death, and nobody wants to melt. But it is what it is, and that's the reason, the push. And that's just compassion. Remember the balance. It's going to try and the next layer is to try and confuse the balance of compassion with victimization and then turn that into violence. But that'll all get collapsed. All you gotta do is put a little salt water on the stilts and they start to rot through, and then you get people falling in their own emotions. And there's people who have been put into position to stop, to keep the system going or to keep life going. So, but it's just going to be a shift at that point of those who are absolutely capable of enhancing and appreciating that beauty, no matter with the disgust and the pain and the suffering, and those who don't give themselves that power and become the kind of outcasts of that future world. And we're in a mix right now where people are waking up to realizing this is how the world has been this whole time. And that's what's really been the backbone behind the growing system, the commerce and all that. Which they realize everything's a war. It's a spiritual battle. You start to wake up. Yeah. And even with that, again, that's what we made with it though. It's not really, doesn't have to be that way. Alright. Thank you. And again, the balance is weird because some will say certain things, war is not what we made of it, it's what we were born into, it's what happened to us, it's what we've had to do because of somebody that created a false reality or launched a kind of mind virus or genetic virus and forced these types of scarcities, emotional scarcity, and a financial system that's required to have such control in order to maintain such a balance. It's not for me to decide at this point whether it's all a game somebody's playing on this level, or whether people participating in certain things on this level are doing so in order to get to a better place, so that we can, as a species, realize what's happened and live in a different way. So that's like an open-ended thing. All right, thanks.